This is one of the deadliest places that has ever existed on Earth. Not a battlefield, not a war zone, a parking lot in the middle of Los Angeles. Beneath the asphalt of this unassuming city park lies a mass grave more than 50,000 years old, and inside it, scientists have pulled out the shattered, tar-black bones of over 4,000 individual predators, all from a single species, all caught in the same trap, all dead within feet of each other. That number should stop you. 4,000 apex predators, found in one place. To put that in perspective, you could search the entire African savanna for a decade and never find that many lion skeletons in one location. This isn't a graveyard, it's a killing field, and the animal that dominates it more than any other predator on the planet is one you think you already know. You've seen it on a flag, sewn onto a banner, howling beside a stark child in the snow. But the real dire wolf was not a wolf at all. It wasn't even closely related to one. It was something older, something stranger, the last surviving member of a bloodline that had been hunting this continent for millions of years before a single gray wolf ever set foot on it. And the way it died, trapped in its hundreds, drawn in by the screams of dying prey, is one of the most horrifying predator extinction events in Earth's history. This is the true story of Anaxiondirus, the terrible wolf. Picture the modern gray wolf, lean, fast, 100 pounds of muscle built for the chase, capable of trotting for miles at a stretch, wearing its prey down through sheer patient endurance. Now forget it, because the dire wolf was not built to wear anything down. It was built to end things, instantly, at up to 150 pounds, with a skull broader, denser, and more heavily muscled than any wolf alive today. The dire wolf carried jaw muscles anchored to bone ridges, so pronounced they're still visible on fossils 50,000 years old. Paleontologists who've studied its bite mechanics estimate a force capable of generating well over 150 pounds per square inch of pure crushing pressure, enough to shatter the leg bone of an animal 10 times its own weight in a single closing of the jaw. This wasn't a killing bite. This was a demolition bite. And to understand why it needed to be built this way, you have to understand what it was hunting. Because the world the dire wolf lived in wasn't populated by deer and rabbits. It was populated by giants. The giant ground sloth stood taller than a grown man on its hind legs and could weigh over 2,000 pounds, with claws the length of kitchen knives, capable of disemboweling anything foolish enough to attack it head-on. The ancient longhorned bison carried horns spanning over 6 feet tip to tip. Even the horses and camels of this era ran larger, heavier, and more dangerous than anything grazing on Earth today. A 100-pound wolf, hunting alone, stood no chance against any of them. So the dire wolf didn't hunt alone. It hunted in overwhelming numbers. Fossil evidence from La Brea suggests dire wolves lived and hunted in packs, far larger than any wolf pack seen today. Sometimes 20, 30, or more animals working as a single, coordinated killing machine. In a world crowded with megafauna, you needed size, numbers, and raw structural power just to survive as a predator, let alone rule as one. The dire wolf didn't chase for miles like a modern wolf does. It didn't need to. It used ambush, encirclement, and the collective bone-crushing weight of the entire pack, closing in from every direction at once, so that by the time the prey understood what was happening, it was already surrounded. Imagine standing in that clearing. Imagine watching 20 sets of glowing eyes emerge from the tree line around you, all at once, all silent, all moving with the same terrible intention. There would be no time to run. There would only be the pack, and then there would be nothing at all. For over 100,000 years, this was the apex predator of Ice Age North America. Not the saber-toothed cat, not any bear. The dire wolf sat at the very top of the food chain, and it did it not through speed or stealth, but through the sheer physical horror of coordinated, overwhelming force. But here's where the story turns from terrifying to genuinely bizarre. Because everything you just learned about how the dire wolf hunted, how it looked, how it lived, none of it means what scientists spent over a century assuming it meant. For over 100 years, scientists believed the dire wolf was exactly what its old name suggested, Canis dirus, a cousin of the gray wolf, a bigger, scarier branch on the same family tree. It was a reasonable assumption. The skeleton looked like a wolf's. The behavior looked like a wolf's. Every visual clue pointed the same direction. There was just one problem. Almost none of the dire wolf fossils scientists had access to were usable for genetic testing. Here's the cruel irony of La Brea. It's the single richest dire wolf fossil site on the planet. Thousands of nearly complete skeletons, astonishingly well preserved. But the very substance that preserved them for 50,000 years, that same thick, saturating asphalt, also methodically destroyed the one thing scientists needed most: intact, ancient DNA. Tar doesn't just entomb a bone. Over millennia, it infiltrates it, seeping into every microscopic pore and chamber, breaking down the fragile genetic material inside cell by cell, degrading it into fragments too damaged and too contaminated to sequence. For decades, La Brea's 4,000 dire wolves sat in museum drawers as a genetic dead end, a perfect fossil record with no readable code inside it. So scientists went looking somewhere else, not in tar, in stone, across scattered cave systems in Idaho, Wyoming, and the Yukon. Sites where dire wolves had occasionally died and been sealed away in cold, dry, mineral-rich sediment instead of asphalt. Researchers began the slow, painstaking work of hunting for the rare specimens where enough genetic material might have survived undamaged. It took years. It required dozens of samples, most of which yielded nothing usable at all. Then, in 2021, a team finally succeeded. They extracted 5 viable genomes from dire wolf remains, ranging from over 50,000 to more than 13,000 years old. And when they finally sequenced the code hidden inside those ancient bones, the results didn't just surprise them, they rewrote the entire species. The dire wolf wasn't a wolf. Genetically, it had almost nothing in common with the gray wolves, coyotes, and jackals we know today. Its lineage split off from that family tree over 5.5 million years ago. So long ago, and so completely, that dire wolves and gray wolves could not have interbred, even if they'd tried. They weren't cousins. They were near total strangers, separated by millions of years of isolated evolution on 2 entirely different continents. The dire wolf evolved entirely in the Americas, alone. It was the last surviving member of an ancient, uniquely American lineage that has no other survivors left anywhere on Earth. Scientists were forced to give it a new name, Enotiondirus, the terrible wolf, but no longer a wolf at all. Think about what that actually means. Every wolf-like predator you've ever seen, in a zoo, in a documentary, on a nature reserve, shares a common ancestor with every other wolf-like predator on Earth, except this one. The dire wolf looked like a wolf because of convergent evolution, because being a big, pack-hunting predator of large herbivores demanded a very specific body plan, and evolution arrived at that same design twice, independently, an ocean and millions of years apart. It wasn't a wolf wearing a bigger costume. It was something else entirely. Wearing a wolf's shape because that shape happened to work. It's a genuinely unsettling thought. An animal that hunted alongside our ancestors, immortalized in tar, folklore, and fantasy fiction. And it turns out we've been picturing the wrong creature the entire time. Not a wolf, a ghost lineage, buried under asphalt for 50,000 years, hiding a genetic secret that almost went to the grave with it, which makes what actually happened in that tar, night after night, for tens of thousands of years, even more haunting. For hundreds of thousands of years, crude oil seeped up from deep beneath what is now Los Angeles, pooling on the surface in shallow, deceptively solid-looking patches, often disguised entirely by a thin layer of dust, water, or fallen leaves. To the eye, it looked like ordinary ground. It was anything but. Let's walk through exactly what happened here, not in the abstract, minute by minute. It begins with a single misstep. A giant ground sloth, weighing well over a ton, wanders across the basin in search of water and steps onto a patch of ground that looks solid. It isn't. The moment its full weight presses down, the crust gives way and its leg sinks knee-deep into thick, black asphalt. It pulls. The tar pulls back. Every second that passes, every panicked lunge to free itself only drives the animal deeper, because struggling against asphalt doesn't loosen its grip, it tightens it. Within the first hour, the sloth is trapped past its hindquarters. It begins to call out, a deep, guttural distress cry that carries for miles across the flat, open basin. That sound doesn't fade quickly, and in the surrounding darkness, dozens of pairs of eyes are already turning toward it. To a dire wolf pack, That cry means one thing: not danger, opportunity. An animal too large to kill under normal circumstances, suddenly immobilized, suddenly vulnerable. 20 wolves begin moving toward the sound, closing the distance in the dark with the confident, practiced patience of a predator that has never had reason to fear an already trapped meal. For a few minutes, it looks exactly like every other kill this pack has made 1,000 times before. They tear into the animal's exposed hindquarters, working as a unit, confident in the ground beneath their own paws. That confidence is the trap's second victim. One wolf breaks through, then another, rushing to help it, breaks through beside it. The same instinct that made this pack unstoppable against every other predator on the continent. Total, unhesitating commitment to the pack, no wolf left behind, is now the exact mechanism dragging them all down together. Over the following hours, more wolves arrive, drawn by the yelping of their own trapped packmates, and more of them sink into the same hidden pool. What began as a single sloth's misstep becomes, by dawn, a mass grave. Predator and prey locked together in the same patch of ground, exhausted into stillness, as the tar slowly, silently claims them all. This is why paleontologists have pulled over 4,000 individual dire wolves from a single tar pit the size of a parking lot, far more than any other species found at the site, including the herbivores that supposedly lured them in. It isn't a monument to their power. It's a monument to a horrifying feedback loop. A predator so loyal to its own pack, so committed to answering the sound of a packmate in distress, that the trait which made it dominant for 100,000 years is the very same trait that helped bury it, generation after generation, in the same stretch of ground. Every skull in that collection tells the same story. A predator so successful, so certain of its own power, undone by the one thing its instincts couldn't override. But the tar pits alone don't explain the dire wolf's extinction. Something far larger, far slower, and far more inescapable was already closing in around the entire species. As the Ice Age ended, the planet began to warm, and the vast, grass-choked landscapes that had sustained herds of giant herbivores for millennia began to shrink and fragment. Forests crept into open steppe, grasslands dried and thinned, and the great, slow-moving giants the dire wolf had built its entire existence around. The ground sloths, the ancient bison, the mammoths, the camels, the horses began vanishing, species by species, in what scientists now call the quaternary extinction event. For a predator built entirely around pack hunting, massive, slow-moving prey, this was catastrophic. The dire wolf wasn't just losing its food source. It was losing the very evolutionary strategy that had made it the apex predator of an entire continent for over 100,000 years, and its body couldn't adapt fast enough to compensate. That broad, bone-crushing skull, that heavy, powerful frame, built to demolish something the size of a small car. Every physical trait that had made the dire wolf dominant in a world of giants became, almost overnight in evolutionary terms, an enormous metabolic liability in a world where the giants were disappearing. And it wasn't disappearing into a vacuum. A newer, leaner rival was already spreading across the same territory, having crossed from Eurasia over the land bridge into North America. The gray wolf, where the dire wolf needed massive prey and massive pack sizes to justify its own energy costs, the gray wolf needed neither. It could survive on deer, on elk, on rabbits, on carrion, a far wider, far more forgiving menu. It could hunt in packs of 6 instead of 20. It could run farther on less food, recover faster, breed in more varied conditions, and simply outlast almost anything the changing world threw at it. For a while, the two species almost certainly overlapped, competing directly for the same dwindling herds in the same shrinking territory. And in that competition, size and strength meant nothing anymore. Efficiency did. The dire wolf's specialized brute force body plan, once an unbeatable advantage, had become a debt it could no longer pay. Every hunt cost more energy than it used to yield. Every winter culled more of the pack than the last one had. Litters grew smaller. Territories grew emptier. The terrible wolf didn't lose to a bigger, stronger predator. It lost to a changing planet and to a smaller, hungrier rival that simply needed less to survive on more. By roughly 10,000 years ago, Anasaendirus was gone, an ancient 5 million-year-old lineage, one of the most dominant predators in the history of North America, erased in what amounts to a geological blink, not by claws or teeth, but by starvation, attrition, and a world that no longer had room for a giant. What it left behind wasn't just bones in an asphalt pit. It left behind a myth, a legend so powerful that thousands of years later, we'd resurrect it, not as the strange, genetically isolated ghost lineage it actually was, but as something more familiar. A wolf, a companion, a symbol of loyalty and savage nobility, standing beside a child of winter in a story about ice and fire. The real dire wolf never met a Stark. It never howled at a wall. But it did rule an empire of ice, snow, and megafauna for over 100,000 years, alone in its own lineage, apex in its own right, and gone long before humans ever thought to give it a name. 4,000 skulls, one tar pit, one extinct lineage, with no living relatives left on Earth. The dire wolf wasn't a myth. It was something far stranger, and far more alone. But the dire wolf wasn't the only apex predator this world produced, and buried. Because deep in the fossil record, there's a creature even more massive, even more terrifying, that ruled long before the ice ever came. And its story is even darker than this one.